All right, we're continuing in chapter 7, starting from slide number 20 in the PowerPoint here. We're talking about the Bretton Woods system, and basically this was developed during and after World War II in response to a lot of the economic trade wars that occurred in the Great Depression. Again, during the Great Depression, various nations adopted protectionist policies, beggar thy neighbor policies, where they enacted tariffs on the importation of goods from other countries. And because of that, the volume of international trade basically shut down, which that created political tensions, which led to some of the aspects of World War II, not all of it, but some of it did. And so after World War II, the U.S., as the dominant power, basically pushed for the creation of an economic order that was based on the liberal principles of the free market and free trade. And so, again, they were trying to eliminate these beggar thy neighbor policies from the 1930s. I think I talked about this in class, or one of your classes, but one of the things that President Trump did in 2017 and 2018 and 2019 is he increased U.S. tariffs on the importation of Chinese goods because China had been doing that to us, and China had been getting away with that. So Trump engaged in basically, you would say, almost like a beggar thy neighbor policy. Was it controversial? Yes, because again, there are mechanisms in place and penalties in place in the international system through the UN that will penalize or punish a country for doing that. So it was controversial, but President Trump's attempts to do this caused China to blink and lowered their tariffs on U.S. goods, so it ended up being a net gain for the U.S. Just kind of interesting there. So if you look at slide number 21, the goal of the Bretton Woods system was to create institutional barriers that prevent the global economy from sliding back into neo-mercantilism. Again, neo-mercantilism is the idea of this kind of tit-for-tat strategy where one nation will raise tariffs on another nation, and then it'll just escalate, and other nations will do that. So you've got this whole, a large number of countries doing that, and the net effect is it basically slows down trade, raises prices, and impacts domestic industries. If you go to slide number 22, you can see the section there where it talks about a regime, the international trade regime. What's a regime? It's a set of principles, norms, rules, and procedures that guide international behavior in a specific issue area. And so there is what's called the Bretton Woods trade regime. Again, these are principles and norms where, again, they tried to avoid a 1930s 2.0. And by and large, they really have. It's been successful. So the three components of it is the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, GATT, the IMF, or the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank. And so let's just look at GATT, and that's on slide number 23. It is less formal than an international treaty, but basically countries that trade internationally agree to reduce protectionist barriers, and they engage in something called non-discrimination. In other words, nations that are involved in the GATT treaty basically do not agree to not discriminate against another country that's a member. Okay, so in other words, it's really important to become a member. If you're a non-member, you're on the outside looking in, and you might be subject to tariffs. When I was working before I was teaching, I worked for a company called Zenith Data Systems in St. Joe, Michigan, and I was a corporate buyer. I bought computer parts. I bought basically the chips from Intel, various microprocessors. I bought hard drives from China. And where I kind of came into contact with the GATT treaty is early in the 1990s, the Clinton administration basically gave China most favored nation status. In other words, prior to that time, we were not able to buy products from China because, again, they were not given most favored nation status. Why did China not enjoy most favored nation status from the United States? Because of all of their human rights violations. Has China become a paragon of virtue when it comes to human rights violations since the 1990s? Hardly. In other words, it was very controversial. Did it help our economy? Yes. Are we the benefit? Is every one of you a beneficiary of this? Yes. You've got cheaper goods coming into the economy, and that you have purchased. You personally have, your parents have, all Americans have. But then the controversy of that is it at the risk of, the exploitation of people in China? In other words, one of the, if I can use the term trump cards, pun intended, pun not intended, that America would play before they gave China most favored nation status was this. Listen, you want to play ball, you want to trade with America, you want to enjoy America's goods and services, do you want benefits of trade with America and benefiting your economy, then start treating your people better. Oh, you're not treating your people better? Well, we're not going to trade with you. Well, once the Clinton administration removed that, again, that trump card, if you will, could not be played. And so what is stopping, or what's a check on the Chinese government from engaging in human rights violations? Anyway, a digression there. But the idea of the GATT treaty is, again, to remove protectionist barriers. The problem with the GATT treaty is it did not have a resolution mechanism. And so that led to the creation of the World Trade Organization in the 1990s. And this, the World Trade Organization provides a legally binding dispute settlement process. And so complaints about protectionism can be taken to the World Trade Organization, and it's got a lot more teeth to deal with that. And so you can take a look at slide number 24. It shows you the trade balances or imbalances of various countries from 2005 to 2013. There's a picture there on slide number 25. It shows an example of a call center in India. I don't know how many credit cards you have, or if you've ever had to try to call a credit card company. Many times you'll get, hello, this is Peggy, I'm trying to help you. And many times you'll get somebody who you think is an American and they're actually from India helping you in a foreign country because of some issue that you need with your credit card. The logic of this is that these people in India can do it a lot more cheaply than could be if you had American call centers. So it keeps the cost of using a credit card cheaper. Whether that's factored into your interest rate, I don't know. But again, that's the logic of that. The frustrating aspect of that is somebody who's had a firsthand experience with not just credit card companies, but with other companies that have done that, is quite frankly, sometimes you can't understand them and they can't understand you, and you go round and round and round trying to get help. I do know this from firsthand experience. When you deal with a call center in a foreign country, they don't get American humor, and my wife gets on me all the time for that. They're like, honey, don't use your humor, or don't use sarcasm or different things like that, or euphemisms, because they don't get it. And again, you'll find that out as you get older. If you skip over there to slide number 27, let's talk a little bit about the international monetary regime. Our system has changed since World War II from a fixed exchange rate system where money was basically, or currency was set to a pre-established level in relation to another precious metal. Again, think of the gold standard. So in other words, if the US dollar is connected to the gold standard, generally speaking, that the value of the dollar is not going to fluctuate a whole lot. It's going to stay generally fixed. Again, it's relative to the value of gold, but again, it's a pretty decent standard. So in other words, the value of currency, think of the American dollar, the British pound, Japanese yen, If you go to Europe now, you've got the euro. Okay, you've got different things like that. If it's tied to a fixed currency, it's not going to fluctuate a lot. But in the 1970s, because of inflationary concerns in different areas like that, it has been replaced by more of a floating system. The IMF shifted gears and basically anchored currencies to a floating system. So now the American dollar's value is relative to the value of the German pound or the Deutsche Mark or the Japanese yen or the European euro. Okay, so now the value of again, just take the dollar, it deals with not so much fixed currency, but the balance of payments. So what the balance of payments is the net flow of dollars in and out of a country in connection to its trade and its investments. In other words, when more money flows into a country than flows out, you've got a surplus in the balance of payments. So in other words, that's a good thing for your dollar. It's a bad thing for your dollar if more money is going out to other countries. So in other words, it's a system that is, it seems somewhat relative, and I guess to a great degree it is, but the idea there is it incentivizes countries to trade with one another to try to keep their balance of payments strong, and then it keeps their currency strong. But again, it goes back and forth like that. So if you go over to slide number 28, talking about the IMF again, one of the things that the IMF does is it provides financial assistance to countries who are facing deep and persistent balance of payments difficulties. In other words, for America, it's not a big deal because, again, we've got the dominant economy. For China, it's not a big deal. If you are Uruguay, if you're Paraguay, some South American country, it may not be as beneficial to you. And so the IMF basically provides finances to that. And but they provide finances, or they provide financial help to these countries based on something they call the Washington Consensus. Again, they give aid out contingent upon abiding by several different principles that again favors the American system. In other words, we'll give you financial aid through the IMF if you reduce state economic regulation. Again, the more that the state is not allowed to regulate the economy and influence the economy, the better. So they'll give you more money, more funds. They look at the privatization of state industries. In other words, they don't want a lot of government-controlled industries. They don't want, perhaps, healthcare controlled by the national government. They want to make sure it's in private hands or various other private industries. They want to make sure that those countries, in order to get aid, don't have trade barriers. They don't engage in tariffs. They reduce restrictions on foreign investment. They want to make sure that these countries reduce government spending. Okay, so in other words, they don't want the government continually going into debt. And it is generally, it favors market forces. So in other words, if you look at the Washington Consensus, think the American economic system. Think the American capitalistic system. The Washington Consensus favors what is going on in America, what made America's economy so strong, and they gauge aid to other countries from the IMF based on those countries complying to those principles. So I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to resume to slide number 29.